friends, continuing to the chapter The Prohibit of Yon Ode, the photograph and the journal. Nikki walked back to the green Havel, thought zooming around in her mind like the bees. So much had happened in just 2 days. She felt like a little dizzy with it all. She would read for a while. She decided to get calmed down. Her plan was for the afternoon was to go through the look at a later pile. She went into the kitchen to make herself a cup of hot chocolate, and it occurs to her all at once that the hot chocolate was the perfect thing to give up. It was something she really liked, so it would be hard to give it up. And doing something hard would strengthen her goodness, just the way exercises strengthen the muscles. So she made a cup of an mint tea instead and carried it up to the nursery, where she took her look at later, piled from the toy cabinet and set it on the window seat. The light was dim there because of the blanket she and Amanda hung over the windows, and because of a cloudy sky, she pushed one of the blanket aside a little and settled down with a big red pillow at her back. Otis jumped up next to her. The first thing she wanted to check was the envelope. She began to look at yesterday. She picked it up and sorted out the photograph. It was a brownish and had a cardboard backing. It showed 6 people, two men, 2 women seated, and 2 children sitting on a floor in the front of them. They were old-fashioned outfits and had sore looks on their faces, as if they were annoyed with the photographer for making their still so long. There was something odd about the 2 men who sat next to each other in the center of the group. At first, Nikki thought one of them was sitting in the other's one lap. She looked closer. The 2 men who looked just alike seemed to be stuck together. Yes, they were joined, but what's looking like a thick fingers of the flesh that went from the stomach of one of the stomach of the others. That was why they were sitting in that odd way. They were twins, connected twins, or something like that. There was another word for it that she couldn't remember. Under the picture, someone had written, "The Mrs. Brunker and their wives visited to Greenhaven on June 1868." Visitors to Greenhaven. They had been here in this house. He gazed at the picture a long time. How would it be to live your life attached to someone else? You could never get away from each other's, not to go for a walk, not in a bed at a time, not even in the bathroom. If one was sick, the other would have to lie there too. If one wanted to go down and the other wanted to stay back home and read the newspaper, they have had to negotiate about it and try to agree. Each one would always hear everything the other one said. It was a stranger kind of a life she could imagine. She puts the picture back in its envelope and took up the small brown notebook that Amanda had brought to her, the one her great grandfather had written in. She read the first entry again, and where she had said she had been having the old experiences, and then she read on. 12 bar 10. It is a second floor bedroom. I think the one at the west end of the hall. Why there? Some memories were triggering. Can't figure it out. 12 bar 13. Dan Hip. Having me trouble. Stayed in a bedroom most of the day. 12 bar 19. Althea T. Still not speaking much after nearly 6 months. Brenna B. Very worried about her. He was writing about the prohibit, but then the next entry was about something quite different. 12 bar 27. Could past, present, and the future all exist at the same time, and certain people slip around between them? See theories set forth in the recent C. Journals asked Young. What was that about? A movement on a sidewalk below caught her attention. She looked out of the window. There was Mrs. Besant, wearing a rain jacket with a hood over her baseball cap, walking a long-bodied, short-legged dog on a leash. That must be Sausage, Nikki thought. She watched as Mrs. Besant walked on. and turned it at a house across the street. It was a bright, brisk house, that old but well cared for, with a straightened path that led to a wide front door with a tall, narrow window on the each side. Two bushes flanked the door, both of them trimmed into a neat round shape like a green patch balls. With the tall, narrow windows on each side, two bushes flanked the door, both of them trimmed into the next round shaped like the green beach balls. It was a perfect looking house, Nicky thought, just right from the Beesons who was aiming to get rid of all the wrongness in the yarn oats. If only the whole world country could be that way. She watched until Mrs. Beeson and Sausage had disappeared into the house. Then she lay back on the big red pillow to think for a while. And the next thing she knew, it was a twilight outside and the crystal voice was calling from the downstairs. She kept up and rushed out of her room, not forgetting to cram the rags under the door. And she spent downstairs before the crystal could come up looking for her. What's a day? Crystal said. She hung her coat on the coat rack that stood in the hall. I have been all over the place. What have you been doing? Just reading. Mostly, said Nicky. Found anything interesting? Lots, Nicky said. This house is just full of an interesting stuff. I don't see how can stand to sell it. Crystal just shrugged. Interesting stuff like what? She said. I found a really strange old picture from one thing. Wait a second and I will show you. She dashed upwards again. Otis drove over to her and when she went in, feeling sorry that he had been alone from now till morning, she knelt down and patted him for a while. She rumbled his ears and when he rolled over, scratching his stomach. Then she took the pictures of her twins from its inner envelope and hurried back down the stairs where she could find the crystal talking on the phone. Try not to worry, Crystal said. I'm sure he is fine. Okay, okay, bye. She hung up. That was your mother, she said. Nike cried, but I wanted to talk to her. She was exhausted. Nice cried, but I wanted to talk to her. She was exhausted, said Crystal. Too tired to talk. She just wanted to let us know that she had another postcard from your father. I wrote it down for you. She handed Nicky a scrap of paper. Nicky read, Dear Rachel and Nicky, we are working here hard on a big project. And I'm well and I hope that both of you are too. I miss you, love, Dad. P.S. Sure would like to have one of Rachel's peanut butter cookies right now. Again, not much news, but also again a fuzzing P.S. She couldn't remember her mother ever making a peanut butter cookies. What was going on in her father's mind? Crystal had gone into the kitchen and Nikhil followed her. Here is the picture, she said, putting it on the table. Oh yes, Crystal said. I remember hearing about this. These men were Chang and Eng, who came from Assam. That is what we now call a Thailand. They were the original Seamen twins. They came to the United States and traveled around being exhibited for years. And they were retired to North Carolina, not far from here. Grandfather told me that they have visited this house once. It was at the time of his great-grandfather's, someone after the Civil Wars. They must have given this photo to the family as a sort of an thank you gift. She turned the photos over. Look at this, she explained. They have been writing on the back. Nicky peered at the old-fashioned handwriting. It said, with gratitude for your hospitality, and it was signed with the two names. If this is an antique, said Crystal, it could be worth something. How much? Said Nicky. I have no idea, not a great deal. Probably, but something. Nicky took the photo and turned it over again. I guess those two boys are like their children, she said. Yes, said the Crystal. In fact, I think they had something like a 10 children apiece. Wouldn't it be hard to be married to a Siemens twins? Said Nicky, looking at the grumpy faces of two big women. I surely think so, said the Crystal. In fact, as I recall, the two women were sisters, but they didn't get along. For a while, the twin got themselves two houses, one for each wife, and the husband alternated them between them. She shook her head. Amazing, isn't it? That they marked and managed to work the things out at all. I tried twice, under much easier circumstances, and failed both the times. She opened up a cupboard and took down a can of an soup. Can you bear to have a soup again for the dinner? She said. I'm too tired to do anything else. That's okay, said Nicky. She wondered if she should tell Crystal about the prohibit and Mrs. Beeson and how the young wood was battling the forces of evil by building a shield of an goodness. But she hesitated. Crystal might decide that Nicky shouldn't be getting involved in the battle. She might decide that Nicky needed more supervisions. Nicky didn't want that at all, so all she said was, Crystal, do you think there is going to be a war? I don't know, Crystal said. Fortunately, I'm too busy to think much about it. She cast a quick look at Nicky. Don't you think about it either, she said. There is not much we can do. Just live good lives, right? Nicky said. Not added to the badness, that is what you said before. Huh, said Crystal. She opened the can and scooped the soup into the pot. So if everyone lives good life, then maybe a bad things won't happen. Nicky said. At least not to us. But she could tell Crystal wasn't really interesting. She was holding the soup can under the facet or to fulfill it, but only a feeble trickle of water was coming out. Something is wrong with the water pressure, she said. We must have a leaky pipe somewhere, and the plumbers were just here. They have made it worse instead of better. And of course, tomorrow is Sunday, so a plumber will be hard to find, she sighed. There is so much to do. I suppose I should face the third floors. I haven't even been up there. Nicky's heart jumped into her throat. It is just the rooms full of boxes, she said. You don't need to see it. No, I really should. Crystal stirred the soup with one hand and ran the other hand wearily through her hair. I need to see what I have to deal with. Not tonight, though. I will do it first thing tomorrow morning. Crystal reached for the two bowls. It's getting dark, she said. Would you switch the lights on? That's what went Nicky's remember. We have to close all the curtains and the blinds, she said. We do. Why? So we can be seen from the air, said Nicky. In case there is an attack, she pulled down the kitchen blinds. Oh, I don't think that is necessary, Crystal said. But if it makes you feel better, go ahead. Nicky went from room to the room, closing the curtains and the blinds over the houses. Trouble spots. The next morning after the breakfast, as soon as Crystal has washed her dishes and disappeared into the bathroom, Nicky raced upstairs. He hooked Otis to his leash and flew down the stairs again. She tiptoed past Crystal's room, where she heard the roar of an hair dryer and zipped out the back door. At the far end of a garden, she looped Otis' leash around the trunk of the tree. Now, Otis, she said, try to be quiet. I will come back for you as soon as I can. Inside again, past Crystal's room, this time she heard that the pist of her hair spray. Up the stairs to the nursery, she did the dog dishes and the dog food in a box of an old toy in the closet, tore down the blankets that they have hung over the doors, and then came her Crystal steps on the stairs, and her voice calling, Are you there? Nicky showed up her the two-storage room first. Oh, horrors, said Crystal. Look at the Corvegi trunks and the boxes and the suitcases. It is true that they never threw anything away. Just looking at it gives me a headache. She went towards the nursery. What is it in here? I have been a sort of staying in here, Nicky said. Crystal stood in. She gazed at the rugs, the blanket hangs on the wall, the rocking chair and the lamps. I did it, Nicky said. I wanted to make it gauzy. Crystal smiled at her. Well, it is gauzy, she said. It is actually quite a nice room. It smells like a little funny, though. She wrinkled her noses. Probably there was a rat up under the roof. Let some air in. She went to the window and thrust it open. The sound of embarking and whimpering floated up from the below, but Crystal paid no attention. When we get ready to put the houses on the market, she said, we can sell this as an perfect space for a home gym. Or maybe a medical center screen over there. She raised her hand, measuring a wall sized screen. Theatre sets here could be quite lovely. What do you think? But she didn't pause to hear what Nikki thought, which was that she didn't like any of those ideas. She went right on to say that she would decide what to do about all this later. But today, since it was Sunday and she couldn't do much shopping, she was going to take a drive in with Len. I don't suppose you want to come, she said. Who is Len? Said Mickey. The real estate agent. Oh, said the Nicky. No, I don't want to come. Once Crystal had left, Nicky rescued Otis from the back garden and paid with her a long time to make up for his exile. The shoes they have been using for a toy had turned into an shapeless way by now. So Nicky found an ancient yellow tennis ball in the closet. Otis adored it. He had to stretch his jaws a wide apart to hold it, which makes him look as if he was trying to swallow a grapefruit. When Otis lost interest in chasing the balls and settled down to groan on it, Nicky decided that today would be her day to explore the Yon Wood. It was going to be her home, after all, if she accomplished her goal one. And while she was at it, she would keep her eyes open for the sinners and trouble the spots and anything that had a feeling of wrongness. If she was going to accomplish the goal 3, she needed to understand all this. She would keep her eyes open for Martin, too. She might happen to run into him somewhere and they might happen to talk to each other. She needed to find it out if he was someone she could fall in love with. Goal 2. So far, she couldn't tell. He was a nice looking, he was friendly, sort of. That is what enough for a start. She wandered to the upper end of a main street where the school was empty. Empty today because it was Sunday. Though it was still cold and windy, the sun was out. Some boys were shooting the basket in the schoolyards. She looked to see if the Martin was one of them, but that was not. A few blocks farther on, and she was in an downtown Yon Wood. A few stores were open, but their lights were still off. They looked uninviting like the dim caves. Small clusters of people gathered in the place where TVs were on, showing the news. Nicky heard a sniffets as she passed. 5 days remaining under the deadline, said the president's voice from an gauzy corner cafe. Ambassador has been assassinated, he said from the news stand. Group calling itself the Warrior of God has claimed, he said from the drugstore. The familiar, nervous feeling started up in Nicky's stomach as she heard these words, and she could tell that the other people were nervous too. A woman behind her was talking about how the tension was just killing her, and another woman answered it was killing her too, but that they have to have the faith they would be all right. And the first person said, yes, she did believe that, but she just whispered everyone did. Nicky hurried on, not wanting to hear anyone. Half a block down, she suddenly heard a strange hum. She heard before, where was it coming from? A machine inside a building, some kind of a car or an engine on the street. She looked around but saw nothing. The gum grew silently louder. Was it Braga in the grocery store? She peered up a narrow alley and thought she saw someone darting across the other end, but she wasn't sure. The hum faded. Nicky turned around. Behind her were two often people who had been watching the president at the drugstore a minute ago. A short, bald man and a grey-haired woman. Did you hear the funny sound? She said. Do you know what it was? Neither one answered. They kept on walking. The man cast a suspicious glance at her, and the woman pressed her lips together and shook her head. I just wonder, Nicky said. The woman stopped and glared at her. You should know, she said. Why don't you know? Who child are you? But she didn't wait for an answer. She reached for the man's arm and they hastened away. Nikki felt as if she has been slapped. She wasn't supposed to ask about the hum. That was clear. But why not? How was she supposed to find out if she didn't ask? She went on. Towards the end of a main street, she came to the grocery store, and beyond that was the church she would have seen when she and Crystal had first arrived. The Church of an Fiery Vision, the sign said, but she could also make out the old name that has been crossed out. Youngwood Community Church. Today, the sign also said today's sermon, pulling together in a dark times. A lot of people were gathering here, mining about, greeting one another in low voices. Many of them were wearing the round blue button she would have first seen on Mrs. Beeson. The doors of a church stood open, and beside them was a thin-faced man dressed in a sort of an robe, dark blue with a white border. Was that the renewal lumens? Nikki wondered. She saw Mrs. Beeson standing near him. Thought she almost didn't recognize her at the first, because Mrs. Beeson was wearing a woolly grey hat like an upside-down bowl, and her hair was brushed and fluffy instead of in a ponytail. She spoke to all the people as they went inside. Nikki waved to her and Mrs. Beeson flashed her a smile. Nikki turned around and walked back the way she had come. But on the other side of a street, this time, she noticed a few things that might be the example of the wrongness. By the park, she saw an old man spitting on the sidewalks. Surely that was a wrong thing to do. She also saw an angrily little boy pulling a cat's tail. She told him not to do, and he scowled at her. It was a wicked to be hurt the animals, but was it wicked if a 5 years old did it? She wasn't sure. In an alley beside the Border Apt movie theater, she saw three teenagers girls smoking. She wasn't sure about that one either. Was it bad to smoke or only a bad before a certain age? She would ask Mrs. Beeson. For a few minutes, she followed along behind a group of kids to see if they are being cruel to each other, the way the kids sometimes were. She saw something teasing and a little rough housing, but nothing much. She looked for Martin in this group, but he wasn't there. When she was back where she had started, at the north end of an main street, she headed down hills. The houses were farther apart here than in the Green Havens neighborhood and smaller. He saw a woman sitting on her porch reading the paper. A few children played the ball in the street. No one was doing anything wrong, as far as she could tell. Really, Youngwood seems to like a great ground town, so much better than the dirt. Crime-riddled Philadelphia. Following the words of a prohibit must be working. Farther on, she came to what looked at the first like a big, white, vacant lot. A high fence ran alongside it, and beyond the fence grew a tall, unkempt trees. After 100 yards or so, he came to the gravel drive-in with a mailbox beside it. MacU 600 Havens Road was printed in the black paint on the mail door, and no trespassing sign was nailed to a tree. She recognized the name Mikey. Mrs. Beeson has mentioned this person. He was the one she was worried about. For some reason, she peered up the driveway. At the end, rising from a tangle of trees and rangy shrubs, she could just glimpse the peak of the roof. Tree branches, their shadows across it, and the shadow danced in the wind like a long, thin ghost. Should she go in there and see what McCoy was up to? Not today, she thought. Sometimes other later. She walked on. A block or so farther on, an alley led off an Raven road. Really more of an wide path, rusted and unpaved. It went behind the houses of an Trillinian street. Curious, Nikki turned that way. From the alley, she could see in the backyard. Most of them were empty and quiet. At one house, she heard a loud voices through an open window. She paused a moment to listen. The people inside were insulting each other and swearing. Surely that was bad. Did it mean they have counted as sinners? At the next house, a wire fence border that lay under. Beyond the fences, she could see the gadland, bare branches of a fruit trees, and beyond those, the back of a houses that badly needs a coat of an paint. Just inside the fences, so close to all the alley that she should have touched it if she had wanted to, stood a shed made of weather-worn planks. At this place there was a lot going on. Two small children charged among the tree trunks, yelling to each others. One of them had a toy truck that the other seemed to want, and he chased his brother wildly, falling down on an skid of slippery leaves, shirking the whole time. A window in the back of the houses opened, and the old woman stuck her head out and cried, "You kids, quiet that!" But the kids paid no attention. Nicky watched them, peeking out from behind the shed she wouldn't be noticed. The shrieking boys finally grabbed the trucks away from the other boy, and the boy wailed furiously. Another child appeared, a girl, maybe a 4 or 5 years old, and scolded the boys who was crying. And then a bigger boy, closer to Nicky's age, burst out the back door. He had curly blonde hair, big ears, and a strong, skinny body. The boy leapt down the porch step. "Hey, Roddy, lost your truck," he called. "Want an aeroplane instead?" And he took hold of a little boy's hands and wrinkled him around so that he flew off the ground, squealing with the laughter. "Fly me," said the another boy, and the big boy did, "if you like the girl too." Then he said, "Now all of you quite make such an racket. There is a plenty of toys inside. Go on." "But I want," the little boy started to wail. "Go on," said the boy, "and leave me alone." Nicky expected that he would disappear back into the house, but instead he came towards the shed at the end of the yard. She ducked down quickly. He fiddled with the door for a moment. Maybe it was locked. She couldn't see, and then opened it and went inside. Nicky should probably have left at this point. She had no reasons to think that it was a trouble spot, but as usual, the curiosity took hold of her. What was the boy doing in this failing down shed? Because the shed backed us against the fence, and because there was a dusty window in the back of a shed, just the right height for looking into, she might be able to see in without being noticed. She put her eyes to the glasses inside the backyard shed. It was a Sunday morning, and for once a sunny day. Grove's father was in a garbage, getting ready to change the oil in the car. His mother had gone to the church. Grover finally had some time to himself. When the little kids had finished their breakfast, he stood them outside. "Get out there and tear around," he said. "There is a sun today, but it might be gone tomorrow." They charged into the backyard, and he had sat with Granny Clary at the kitchen table while she finished her cup of coffee. He contemplated his grandmother. She was wearing a plain flapping shirt this morning with a green sweat shirts over it and an orange sweatpant with a thick, fluffy socks and her dark slippers. Her short white hair was so wispy that her pink claps showed through. "Going to sit out the porch this morning," she said. "Take in some one." "You would have better wear a cap," Grove said. "It is chilly out there." "I will," she said. "I have got the nice green and an yellow one your mother knitted me." Grove smiled to himself. His grandmother didn't care a bit what she looked like. She would be happy wearing a 15 different colors, all collapsing with each other's. She sometimes looked like a heap of an bright laundry with a little wrinkly walnut head on the top. His mother was always trying to get her to stiff up, but Grover thought that she looked fine the way she was, completely different from every other lady in the town. From outside came a 5 or 6 preaching sheiks. Granny Carries rose from the table and hoisted up the window by the back door. "You kids, quiet that," she yelled. More sheiks followed, and then a wail. "I will go deal with them," Grover said. "I'm go out there anyway." He took his jacket from his hook by the back door and went out into the yard. For a few minutes he followed around with the kids and then he shooed them back into the house and went down to his shed. If the kids behaved and if fathers didn't call him to help with the car, he haven't had at least an hour, maybe more of all to himself. The shed door was fascinated with a combination lock. It is a combination known only to him. He trickled it and opened it and went it inside, closing the door behind him. As soon as he was in there, he became as a always a different groover, not the funny groover, not the big brother groover, but the serious, brilliant, totally focused groover, pursing his patience. A few rusted garden tools still hung on one wall of the shed, but he would have cleaned out all the old broken flower pots and half empty boxes of an plant foods and a bag of an moldy potting soil that used to be in here. Along one side of a shed, he had built a wide shelf, and on the shelf were the two glass tanks, each equipped with lights and sitting on an heating pad, where he kept his prized possessions, his snakes. He bent down and reached into each tank in turn. "How are you doing, my beauties?" he murmured. Both snakes were barely visible. They had burrowed under the dry leaves and a bark. He had put it in the tank from the shelter. All he could see was a small patch of an patterned scales pressed against the wall in one tank and the narrow tip of a tail lying across a twig in the another. He checked the temperature in the tanks, 86 degrees for one, 80 for the other. Just right. Then he raised the glass top of a tank on the left and set it down on the shelf. He reached inside in a slow, unchattering way, and he took hold of a snake gently a few inches behind its head and raised it up into the air. It curved and winged, looping itself into an yes and then J, as it as an yes again, flowing like a moving rock between the groover's hand. It was a gorgeous creature, nearly 2 feet long. Rings on a black and yellow and rusty red alternated all down its slim body. It looked like an beaded belt, except that at the top end was head with an glittering black eyes and a darting tongue like a silver of a paper black. "Pretty soon," said Grover. "I will have some dinner for you, maybe tomorrow or the next day. Something delicious." He held up the snakes and looked into its eye. "Okay." The snake was named as a Fang. He had found it during the summer, sleeping at the base of a rock in the woods. It was the first milk snake he had captured, and he was very pleased with it. For nearly 8 months now, he had kept it alive and healthy. Fortunately, it didn't have been to be fed very often during the winter. Finding the food it wasn't easy, and he couldn't always afford to order for the reptile supply company. Of the dozens of a snake he had captured in the last 3 years or so, he had kept this one the longest. If he couldn't find the food for his snakes, or if he started to lose sticky, he always let them go. Grover was on his way to being a snake expert. 4 years ago, a snake had come out of his bushes and crossed the path in front of him as he was walking in the mountains. He had stopped and watched as it slithering along, moving without the legs, swimming without the water, and create a build it all in one line. Strange and beautiful, and to him, thrilling rather than frightening. He had been 9 years old at the time. The whole rest of the summer, he has scrambled around it in the woods, looking under the rock and the log in the holes in the ground, hoping to find a snake to take home with him, so he couldn't see it up close and watch its life. He went to library and got out the books about the snake, and on the library computer he went on the internet and found the endless pages of an information and the pictures. Before long his head was packed with the snake knowledge. For a while he talked to everyone about his new patient, his parents, his grandmother, his friends, Martin. But his parents were too busy to be very interested, and Martin didn't understand how he could care about such a dirt, glimpsy things. Only his grandmother really listened. She thought it was a fine idea to collect the snakes as long as he didn't ever show them to her. She said that she would scream like a fire engine if any snake get close to her. So now the grower kept his snake to himself. He fixed up the shed. His father didn't have the time for gardening anymore, so he didn't mind, and he used a very penny he could earn on a snake's supplies. So far he had found, kept, and released 37 snakes. Only two had died in their care. He knew all the kinds of a snake around where he lived. Now his ambitions has grown. He had a plan. All he needed to make it happen was the money. He was working on that. Success was near. He told this to his snakes. Success is near, Fang, he said. Really? No doubt about it. You will see. With a hand that wasn't holding the fang, he took the lid off the other tank. This tank held the Lycoris whip, his young red-billy snake. He had had it only a few weeks. It was the thickness of an slender cord, about a foot long. He lifted it out. He held the two snakes up, one in each hand, and gazed at them as they wove among his fingers and coiled around his wrist, sidling their cool dry skin against his skin, raising their small, elegant heads and starting back at him, almost as if they were about to speak. Then suddenly he heard a noise, a soft thump against the wall of the shed, a rustling. He shifted his gaze to the dusty window, just in time to see something move quickly on the other side. Someone was out there. As fast as he could, he set the snakes back in the tanks and put the lids on. Then he dashed out and ran along the fences to the gate and led out to the alley. Up ahead, going around the curve, someone was running, but it was too far away to see who. He didn't try to give a chase. Probably it was Martin, who used to be his friend, trying to catch him doing something forbidden. He didn't bother to run after him. He went back to the shed. What is the matter with that guy? He said to the fang and Lycoris whip. Seeing like he is out to get me. He took a fang out on his tank, wrapped them around his shoulders, and started it on the task of cleaning the tanks. But after he had been working 20 minutes or he heard a footsteps outside. The door of a shed opened and his father leaned in. Got an emergency job to do, he said, leaky pipes. I'm going to need your help. Grover signed. He put a fang back into his tank and after locking up the shed, followed his father back to the house. The perfect living room. Nikki has bumped against the shed by accident when her foot slipped on a stone. She had seen the boy's face turn towards the window, and she had dashed away, going up the hill towards the town, running until she was sure no one was following her. What she had seen in the shed had given her a chill. The boy holding the snakes up in both the hands and gazing at them so adorably. The snake twisting in the dim air, their black tongues flicking out and in. She had never seen a live snake before. We weren't the most snake poisonous. Won't it be dangerous to have a snakes in the place where there were a children's? She felt a surge of an excitement. This might truly be a trouble spot. She reminded herself of Mr. Beeson's words, a sense of an wrongness. Sometimes you can't just feel it. The boy with the snake definitely gave her a strange, creepy feeling. She walked faster. Mr. Beeson would be home from the church by now. She would go straight to her house. She had a lot to ask her about. Mrs. Beeson's doorbell had a three bells like a note. Ting, ting, tong. After Nikki rang it, she waited nervously. Maybe you are suspected to have an appointment to talk to Mrs. Beeson. But the door opened, and there she was. She had no hat on, but she was still in her church outfit, and she had her dad phone clapped up against her ears. Sausage came tottering up behind her and sniffed at Nikki's shoes. Just a second, Ralph, Mrs. Beeson said into a phone. She smiled at Nike. Come on in, honey, she said. I will be off the phone in a Jeff. Night walked in. As she waited, she noticed again the round blue button pinned to Mrs. Beeson's sweater. What was the little picture on it? It seems to be a tall, narrow building, like, of course, it was a tower, and the prohibit name was Alta Towers. So, Ralph, Mrs. Beeson said into the phone, you'd have to trust me on this. We have to get everyone behind us, and if we needed to use an unusual measures, well, then we do. There are an unusual times. She paused. I know, but that was, she said. I'm sure, yeah? All right, see you later. She set down her phone and turned to Nikki. Come right in here, she said, leading the way into the living room. Nikki was curious to see if Mrs. Beeson's house was as perfect as on inside as it was on outside. It was Mrs. Beeson, has the costliest and the neatest living room Nikki had ever seen. A fat white couch sat opposite flat blue armchair. A coffee table held a plate of cookies and three books neatly scattered, the top one a black with an gold letter on the front, probably a holy book of some sort. Three pictures hung on the walls. One of was a beautiful sense of a mountain lake, one was a colorful photograph of a sausage, and one photo was a graph of an freckle-faced young man in a soldier uniform. My husband, Mrs. Beeson said, killed 20 years ago in a five-national war, fighting against our enemies. A vase of an artificial roses stood on a mantel, and next to it is a box in the shape of an heart. There was no mess at all, no sweaters draped over the chair backs, no flopped open magazines, no shoes left on the floor, no stuff scattered anyway. It was just the opposite of an green heaven. A jingling tune was playing shortly, but Nicky couldn't tell that where it was coming from. Mrs. Beeson, she said, I need to say you and ask you about something. Very good, said Mrs. Beeson. Have a seat. Help yourself to a cookie. Nicky sat on a white couch. Mrs. Beeson was about to sit down across from her when suddenly a soft roar started up, and a little dome-shaped machine rolled into the room. Sausage skittered frantically and jumped onto Mrs. Beeson's lap. Don't mind the robot vacuum, said Mrs. Beeson. Just lift up it from your feet when it comes close. It makes a sausage a bit nervous, but I think it is marvelous. I have programmed it to do the whole house every other day. Nicky watched, fascinated, as a vacuum turtled back and forth across the floor. It is cute, she said. She took a cookie from the table. Isn't it? Isn't it? Said Mrs. Beeson. I have found many of you gadgets so helpful. Like my little dart phone, I can take the pictures and send email, record the TV, get instant news, identify the poisonous substances, tell one fingerprint from the another, all kinds of useful things. Now, if it could just detect the wrongdoings, said Mrs. Beeson, laughing. What a helpful that would be. She scratched the sausage's ears. So you have something to ask me? Yes, I do. Nicky set down her half-eaten cookie and told Mrs. Beeson about the old shed and the boy with the snakes twining around his arms. It wasn't sure if he would count as a sinner or not. Snakes, said Mrs. Beeson. She lifted a foot as a Robert vacuum rolled behind her chair. Where was this? Nicky told her. Interesting, said Mrs. Beeson. I have been reading a great deal of spiritual literature that last month, and I haven't came across one good word about the snakes. Something, some other things too. I wonder about Nicky saying, spitting on the sidewalk and pulling a cat's tail and smoking. I wasn't sure about the cat or smoking. It was the little boy hurting the cat, and the some teenagers in the park smoking. Mrs. Beeson nodded frowning, and some peoples were yelling in house of an Trillium streets. Nicky went on. It sounded like a bad fight, but I didn't hear what it was about. What address? Mrs. Beeson asked. Nicky described the houses, and she said, suddenly inspired. You know that the man Hotcoy? Mrs. Beeson leaned forward. The Wacom had moved on to the another room now. She said, sausage back down on the floor. Yes, what about him? When I passed his house, Nicky said, I a kind of peeked up the drive and I saw a strange shadow, like a black ghost or something hovering around outside. It's made me feel creepy. Said Mrs. Beeson. Very interesting indeed. I know it was a bad to the spy, Nicky said, and a bad to eavesdrops and to look into the windows at the boy with the snake. I probably shouldn't have done it, but Mrs. Beeson held up a hand. She looked Nicky straight in the eyes. For a moment she didn't speak, and Nicky heard again the jingly tone that the noise of an vacuum has covered up. You did well, Mrs. Beeson said. Her voice was solemn. Listen, honey, I want you to remember this. When you know that you are doing a God's work, then you are willing to do anything. I mean anything. A shiver like a miniature lightning bolt shot through the Nicky's middle. Right beneath her ribs, anything if it is God's work, she thought. Yes, that what it it is to be an holy person. You will willing to do anything. She thought of the stories she heard about the saints who let themselves be killed in an awful ways. She thought about the brave characters in the books and she loved how they faced monsters and crossed the flaming mountains and did not live by the rules of ordinary people. And it wasn't out of a question for someone as young as herself to be like them. Often, at least in her books, it is a child who vanquished the darkness. She could be like that. She felt a great fear, desire to bring the goodness to the world, or at last to the young world. Mrs. Beeson stood up. Sausage got up too. What a help you are, honey, Mrs. Beeson said. I think you and I have the same thing in my mind, a bright, clean world where everyone know how to behave. Wouldn't it be splendid? Nicky nodded, imagining it, everyone kind, everyone good, no creepiness, no wars. So the more of these troubles spot we can find, the better off we will be. Mrs. Beeson went on. Her voice became very strained. Remember what I said about how one modelly strawberry can ruin the whole basket. We are not going to let that happen. We are going to make this as a good and godly town through and through. She bent over and swept the crumbs of an Nicky's cookie into her hand. And I will tell you frankly, honey, in the one to get it done. I may look like dumpling, but I have a spine of an steel. Are you a preacher, Mrs. Beeson? Nicky asked. No, 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 I'm retired, but I can't just sit around, can I? That is not my way. She laughed. I coached the girls' baseball in the springs. I lead a study group at the church. Organize the Young Woods Spring cleanup. Might even run for a mayor someday. I like to wear a lot of different hats. They headed for the hall, where several of Mrs. Beeson's different hats hung from a tree shape that racked. I keep hearing music, Nick said. Where is it coming from? Oh, said Mrs. Beeson, smiling. It was my music box. She darted back into the living room and picked up the heart shaped box from the mantel. It is a very high tech, powered by some new kind of an tiny everlasting battery. Plutonium, I think. It is just goes and goes. It can't beat a charming. Yes, said Nicky. Mrs. Beeson opened the front door and urged her out. Thank you so much, she said. Anything else you notice, you just come and let me know. She beamed at Nicky, and Nicky glowed. Afterwards, thought she felt a tiny bit guilty. She had really seen the ghost hovering around Hoyt Mackey House or anything bad at all. She had just had a feeling about the place, but everything else she had said was true. Maybe that made up for a small fib. As she came through the Green Harbour front door, the telephone rang. She picked it up and said hello, and Amanda's voice answered. Oh, good, it is you. I just remembered something. I still have the house key. I oath to bring it back. Okay, Nicky said. Come whenever you want. And Amanda, anything new about the prophet? Is she better? No, she is just the same. Really sad and quiet. Keeps on saying the stuff you can't figure out. Sometimes she wanders off. Wanders off? Yeah, it almost like she is waking in her sleep. She goes out in the yard or even out the front door, and I have to quick to get her and bring her back. Is she trying to go somewhere? I don't know. And I still can't come and meet her because I'm so interested, Amanda. Maybe I could tell what else she could say. I doubt it, said Amanda. If Mrs. Beeson can't tell, I don't see how you could. Well, okay, may not, maybe not, Nikki said. But I would like to just see her sometimes. What does she looks like? She looks six, all shadowy, narrow the eyes. Amanda sounded impatient. I have to go. Nick spent the next hours or so roaming around the green haven. She loved being alone here. She burrowed through the silent rooms like a miner hunting for gold. What she wanted was anything old, and especially anything writing. From the desk drawers and the closet shelf and the back of an cabinets, and from the trunks and the boxes in the third floor rooms. She pulled out the pockets of a letter program from a long ago, the theatre performances, journals, and the lecture books, and the guest list and the postcards. She sat on a floor reading until the air around her felt thick with the past, until these words written so long ago seems to say to her, remember us, we are here, we are real. She kept on Otis nearby. If she was sitting on the floor, he pushed him nose against her arm, wanting to be petted. He tugged at the leg of her pant, wanting to play. Sometimes he slept stretched out, belly to the rug, his rear legs flopped behind him like a frog. Now and then he would wander off. When Nicky remembered to look for him, she would find him chewing happily on the corner of a curtain or trying to dig through the hardwood floor. He was all the company she needed. Around 22:30, when Crystal still wasn't back, she decided to take Otis to for his afternoon outing. She heard banging as she went down the hall, probably coming from one of the bathrooms. The plumber must be there. She went out through the kitchen to back garden. To her surprise, the basement door was slightly ajar. The plumber must have gone down there to get at the pipes under the houses. Good. She had been curious about the basement. She could have a look. She picked Otis up, pulled open the door, and peeked in. The plumber had turned on the light. It was dim, just a bulb in the ceiling, but it showed her a flight of a stone step. Holding Oates tightly, she went down. Someone in the basement. The basement was huge, a low ceiling room that stretched out in shadow darkness ahead of her and to the left. It wasn't an empty darkness. She could see what appeared to be low hills lurking in the shadows. Another light bulb shone dimly in a far corner. Did that mean someone was down here? One of the workers, maybe. She thought of calling out, anyone here? But there was something still and heavy about the silence that made her afraid to break it. She would just look around little quietly, and then she would climb up the stairs and leave. The hair had a smell like a damp, earthy underside of the rock. Once he Once her eyes had adjusted to the dimness, she saw the hills where the piles of furniture, a great grown together, masked with just a narrow passage winding through it. Tables lay with their feet in the air, and between the fleets were the other tables and the dining room chairs, and stools and the chest of drawers, and on the top of a chest were some more chairs, upside down, making a nest for the footstool, and a mirror lamp based on an unidentifiable things covered in the sheet. Far back against the wall, a wood floor poster beds, some piled with the three or the four mattresses, a great looming wardrobe with the minor doors. All of it had turned the same dirty grey color because of the dust that coated it. Cobwebs drifted in long string from the ceiling, brushing Nicky faced as she walked by. Otis quivered in his arm. She followed the passage that twitters to all this. It was like walking down a tunnel, almost because the furniture was stacked shoulder high. She moved towards the light. She heard a scrap and then a rustling around sound. She stopped, held her breath, and listened. Was someone in her? She bent down and peeked through the forest of the furniture's leg, but it was too dark to see. Something striped over the wall. Wood knocked against the wood. A head rose from the jumble of the furnitures, and a voice spoke. Pa, is it said, is that you? No, said Nicky. Her heart jumped, but curiosity kept her from running away. The head ducked down again. There was more scraping and rustling, and then someone crawled out from the beneath a big table, a boy with a cobwebs in his hair. I know who you are, the boy said. He held his hand cupped together as if protecting something. The old guy's granddaughter. Great granddaughter, said Nicky. And who is that? He nodded at Otis, who was standing in Nicky's arm. It's Otis, she said. I'm taking care of him for somebody. Who are you? She couldn't see the boy's face. The light was behind him. It cast like a huge, blurry shadow on the cabinet that leans against the headboard of a bed. Groover, said the boy, my pa is fixing your pipes. But what are you doing down here? The boy sprang towards her all of a sudden. Lying in a wait, he cried, for unwary creatures to fall into my traps. Nicky shivered and then instantly regretted it because he laughed to see that he had scared her. I already caught one unwary creature, he said. He held up his clasped hand. It is a poisoner now, awaiting its fate. What it is? She stepped towards her and he stepped back. She couldn't help it. He might have a spider in his hand, and he might be the kind of a boy who would suddenly throw it at you. I will show you if you are brave enough to look, he said. He stretched out his hand and opened them so she could see what he held. It was not a spider. She couldn't tell what it was. Something small and pinkish. Otis strained forward, sniffing madly. She put her hand around his knuckles. An infant mouse, the boy cried. There is 8 of them in the nest down by the heating pipe. Let me see, said Nicky. Hold it in the light. He did. It has an hairless, almost transparent skin, tiny, twisting paws, and little blind eyes. It was about as big as the quarter. Why did you steal it? She asked him. I need it, he said, for my snake. What? For my snake to eat? She looked up at the boy's face, which was fraught in a blond, curly hair, his ears tucked out. She knew suddenly who he was. You don't believe me, he said. I believe you, she said, but I don't like it. She turned around and started back the way she had come. He followed her up the stairs and out of an basement. She set Otis down, and he sniffed Groover's shoe with a great interest. Where is the dog come from? Groover asked. I'm just taking care of him for a little while, Nicky said. He is a secret. Don't tell about him, all right. Groover tilted his head upward and yelled, Hey everybody, guess what is there? Nicky shouted, Stop it. He laughed. I will keep you the secret, he said. Now you have owed me a favor. Are you really going to give that baby mouse to a snake? Nicky asked. Yeah, Groover stretched his mouth into a wicked grin. Because I mean an Eve, he said and gave a manic laugh. Worse then, he lowered his voice to a gruesome whisper. Hoyt Myco, have you heard of him? Nicky nodded, feeling a lurch in her stomach. Well, I have much worse than him, Groover said. You have a spider web in your hair, said Nicky. She turned and walked away from him through the back door and into the house. What terrible luck, she thought. A boy right here where she could get to know him. And he turns out to be a boy with the snakes. And on the top of that, a kidnapper and a murderer of a baby mice. He couldn't possibly fall in love with someone like him. She went upstairs again, planning to read until the crystal got home. She switched on the lamp and picked up her grandfather's notebook. On the floor beside her, Otis went to sleep and dreamed, making soft little wimpy noises and fluttered his paws. Nicky read. 1 by 2, legs were weak and painful. Spent the day reading the scientific journals, integrating by the notion of an extra dimension. Other words right next to ours. Had a chat with my, but of course can't understand a word. What might that be? She knew about three dimension, up, down and sideways. What were the extra dimension? Who was M? She reads on. 1 by 4. Extraordinary experiences last night. Went into the back bedroom to look for scissor. Thought I saw someone in there. Over my bed, dark harried figure. Transparent swill of an skirt. Dreadful feeling of a sorrow hit me like a wave. Had to grab the doorknob, almost fell. Figure faded, vanished. Maybe something wrong with my eyes or heart. He was 93 when he died. Maybe he was losing his mind a little bit, thinking he was seeing the ghost. She reads on. 1 bar 19. Brenda B. came to came by today, all worked up, trying to figure out what Althea is saying and what to do about it. Kept talking about how she is studying every holy book and she get her hands on, aiming to understand God's word. I quitted St. Austin to her. If you understand it, it isn't God. Gave her a cup of an chamomile tea. That was interesting, but then came another mys- mystifying one. 1 by 13. String theory, M theory, 11 dimension, gravity waves, alternate universe, possible leakages between one universe and another. Amazing stuff, M says. His research is very promising. Maybe he thought had he has slipped into an alternate universe in the back bedroom and seen a ghost somehow. Which one was a black bedroom anyhow? Nicky felt the sleeping Otises and went down to the second floor, hoping to catch a sight of a ghost herself. Thank you.